On Halloween night, a group of friends disturb a witch's grave, and soon after, strange, inexplicable things start happening. One by one, they begin experiencing strange phenomena, disappearing, or losing their minds. In a small, forgotten town, there's this story. Everyone around here knows it. It's about Eleanor Drake. You've probably never heard of her, but back in the day, she was accused of being a witch. No one ever found any actual proof, but that didn't matter. They executed her anyway and buried her just outside the town's cemetery in some shallow grave. People say she was innocent, and if you disturb her grave, well, let's just say things don't go well for you. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who buys into this sort of stuff, you know? It's all local legend, just something people tell to freak each other out. But there was this one Halloween night. Yeah, it's always Halloween in these stories, right? Anyway, me and a couple of friends, we thought it would be fun to mess around a bit. We were teenagers, dumb, and looking for trouble. It was me, Jason, Mark, and Laura. We weren't bad kids, just bored, I guess. So, the night starts off pretty normal. We're doing the usual stuff, some drinks, walking around town, goofing off. Then Mark, he was always the one with the crazy ideas, brings up Eleanor Drake's grave. He's like, "Hey, wouldn't it be wild if we went and messed with her grave? See if the stories are true?" Now Jason and I were a bit hesitant. You know, we've heard the stories, but Laura, she was all for it. She wasn't scared of anything. So stupid as we were, we all agreed to go. We grabbed some shovels from Mark's garage, and off we went. The cemetery wasn't too far from the edge of town, but Eleanor's grave was outside of it, just where the old boundary used to be. You could barely see the headstone through the overgrowth. It looked like no one had touched it in years. Honestly, I didn't even know if we had the right spot, but Mark was sure of it. It was around midnight when we got there. The place was dead quiet, no pun intended. It was one of those nights where the wind doesn't even rustle the leaves, you know? The air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on us, but we just laughed it off and started digging. At first, it was all jokes. We were trying to freak each other out, making noises, pretending we heard things. But as we dug deeper, something changed. Laura, who was usually the loudest of us, suddenly went quiet. She kept looking over her shoulder, like she was expecting someone to be standing there. I asked her what was up, and she just shook her head, saying it was nothing. We hit something hard after a while. I don't know if it was a rock or part of the coffin, but the moment the shovel made contact, the temperature dropped. I mean, it was cold, but this was different. It was like all the warmth was sucked out of the air in an instant. We all felt it, and for a second, none of us moved. Then Mark laughed, this nervous kind of laugh, and said something like, "Well, I guess we woke her up." That's when things started getting weird. We didn't see anything at first, no ghosts, no strange figures in the dark. But as we walked back to town, we started hearing things. It was subtle, almost like footsteps following us, but when we turned around, there was no one there. We tried to brush it off, saying it was just our imagination, but deep down, we knew something wasn't right. The real terror didn't hit until the next day. Mark was the first to crack. He called me, saying he couldn't sleep because he kept hearing whispers, Eleanor's name, over and over again. I thought he was just messing with me, but when I saw him the next day, he looked rough, like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot, and he kept glancing over his shoulder like someone was watching him. Jason was next. He said things were moving around in his house. At first, it was small stuff, a cup that wasn't where he left it, his phone going missing and turning up in weird places. Then it got worse. One night, he woke up to his bedroom door slowly creaking open, but no one was there. He swore he could see a shadow standing at the foot of his bed, but when he blinked, it was gone. Laura, she was the one who was most affected. She was always the tough one, but something broke in her. She started having these episodes where she'd just stare off into space, not responding to anything. One time, I was at her house, and she started muttering under her breath, something about Eleanor and the grave. She snapped out of it after a few minutes, but she wouldn't talk about it. Then, one night, Laura disappeared. Her parents said they heard her talking to someone in her room, but when they checked, she was gone. No note, no sign of struggle. Nothing. Just gone. We searched for days, but there was no trace of her, and that's when I realized this wasn't just some stupid prank. Eleanor, or whatever it was, had her now. Jason didn't last much longer. He became obsessed with the grave, convinced that if we went back and made things right, it would all stop. He wanted to put back whatever we'd disturbed. So, one night, he went back there alone. I never saw him again. I'm the last one left. I moved away from that town, thinking it would help, but it doesn't matter. Eleanor. She's with me now. I see her in my dreams, hear her in the whispers that follow me everywhere. She's waiting, watching. A group of urban explorers venture into an abandoned asylum on Halloween night, but things quickly go wrong. Strange footsteps follow them, and the asylum remains shrouded in mystery, begging for more who dare to explore it. I don't really know why I'm writing this. Maybe it's to get it off my chest, or maybe just so someone else will know what happened. I don't think anyone will believe me, but here goes nothing. So, my friends and I, Dylan, Jason, and Sarah, have been urban explorers for years. We'd scout out abandoned places, old factories, forgotten buildings, that kind of stuff. We had a small YouTube channel, nothing huge, but we were always looking for the next big thing to explore. We were hyped. We'd heard about this old mental asylum that had been closed down since the 60s. The place was huge, like a small town on its own, completely fenced off, falling apart, but still standing. And of course there were rumors. Every local had a story about it, people disappearing, weird sounds, the usual urban legends. We didn't buy into that. For us, it was about the thrill and the challenge. We picked Halloween night because why not? It felt like the right vibe. Jason had managed to get the location from some guy on Reddit who had been there before. We geared up, flashlights, cameras, backpacks full of supplies, just in case we got stuck or something. We were ready to go. The place looked even worse than the pictures. The gates were rusted shut, but we found a hole in the fence someone else had already cut. Once we were inside, it was dead quiet, just the wind and the creaking of the old buildings. The front of the asylum had this massive archway with broken windows and ivy growing all over it. It was perfect for our footage. When we stepped inside, the air felt heavier. The hallways were dark, littered with trash, graffiti on every wall. But the deeper we went, the more it started feeling off. There were signs that someone had been there recently, not just graffiti, but things like half-burnt cigarettes, old soda cans that still had liquid in them. Jason joked that it was probably some other explorer, but something about it didn't sit right with me. We kept walking, though. Every floor looked the same, endless rooms, most of them empty. But then Sarah noticed something. In one of the rooms, there was this old mattress, like one of those gross, stained ones you see thrown out on the street. It looked like someone had been sleeping there recently. There were blankets, and next to it, this little pile of food wrappers. That's when we started to get nervous. It was clear someone had been squatting there, and they weren't far off. We should have left then. We should have turned around and gone home. But Dylan, being Dylan, said we had to keep going. He wanted to go down to the basement, said that's where the real good footage would be. I didn't want to look scared, so I followed along. The basement was worse. It reeked. Mold, stale air, like something had been rotting down there for years. Our flashlights barely cut through the darkness. We were walking down this long, narrow hallway when Jason stopped dead in his tracks. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. At first we thought it was just the building settling or something, but then we heard it. Footsteps. Not echoing from far away, but close. Real close. We turned off our flashlights and just stood there, frozen. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, like someone was sneaking up on us. Dylan, still holding his camera, mouthed for us to stay quiet. He pointed his camera down the hallway, but we didn't see anyone. Then, suddenly, a door slammed shut, maybe a few feet away. The footsteps sped up. That was it. We bolted. We ran back up the stairs, tripping over ourselves in the process until we were back on the main floor. But we had no idea where we were. The place was a maze. We must have gone down the wrong hallway because it looked like nothing we'd seen before. Every door was locked, and the ones that weren't led to dead ends. And then we heard it again, the footsteps. This time, faster, like whoever was down there was chasing us. We didn't talk. We didn't stop. We just ran. At one point, Dylan stopped to catch his breath, and that's when we realized Sarah wasn't with us. She had been right behind us, but she was gone. Jason lost it, started yelling her name, but there was no answer, just more footsteps, getting closer. Dylan took off again, and I followed. I don't know how long we ran, but eventually, we made it back to the entrance. We got outside, and for a moment, we thought we were safe. We stood there, panting, trying to catch our breath. But Dylan wasn't with us. We waited for what felt like forever, but he never came out. Jason wanted to go back in, but there was no way I was going back. I don't know how long we stood there waiting, but eventually we called the cops. They searched the place top to bottom. They didn't find Dylan or Sarah. They said there was no sign anyone had been living there, but we know what we saw. They looked through Dylan's footage, and all they found was the last few seconds before he disappeared. The camera dropped, and that was it. No one talks about the asylum anymore. It's like the place just got erased. But every now and then, I'll see a post online, someone planning to explore the asylum, looking for Dylan's last adventure. They never come back.